I read a lot of manga. It initially started because of how low effort so many recent adaptations feel, before eventually becoming an essential tool for learning Japanese at university. Fast forward several years later, and it was how I put food on the table as I sort of fell into the role of a professional manga journalist. That job is gone now, but the habit still remains. The point is, I read a lot of manga. Some of it is translated, some of it isn't, but I only tend to talk about things that are available officially in English on here because fan translations are such a legal grey area. On the one hand, part of me thinks it's only fair enough if the community takes charge, if companies are slow on the uptake, but on the other hand, it's becoming more and more likely that a series gets licensed these days as the demand for manga goes through the roof. As a result, I've seen many series that I started reading in Japanese eventually get an English release over the years. Yofukashi no Uta or Call of the Night is a big one. It's currently my favourite manga in serialization, but that's a topic for another time. There's also Sousou no Frieren or Frieren Beyond Journey's End, which impressed me greatly upon its launch, as well as Asadora and The Dangers in My Heart. Even Fist of the North Star is now coming out in a reasonable format, finally filling a large black hole that has existed in the English-speaking manga market for decades. Nevertheless, there is one series that I really enjoy that is yet to be licensed by anyone in any region. This is quite unusual since French companies in particular are usually very quick to license anything that shows any hint of promise. The market for manga in France is one of the biggest outside of Japan for various reasons, so there's plenty of stuff like Shy, which is licensed in France but practically nowhere else. Unfortunately, this series has remained locked to Japan and to Japanese speakers since it began in 2020. And this is despite being nominated for the next Manga Awards and even coming in second place in the prestigious Manga Taisho Awards last year, which you would think would generate at least some attention among English licensees, but alas, I'm not really sure what the problem is. Today, we're going to talk about the best manga that no one's licensed yet. I'm sort of hoping that this video becomes very out of date very soon when somebody finally picks it up for English release, because more and more people deserve to know about this incredibly unique and original series. And its name is Chikyuu no Undou ni Tsuite. First of all, a note about the title. If you don't know Japanese, then what I've just said will probably sound like absolute nonsense to you, so I'm going to use a translated version for the rest of this video. And while this might not be the same as the eventual official localization, I reckon that chi, about the movement of the earth, is good enough for now. The series is set somewhere in 16th century Europe. A child prodigy named Raphael is about to graduate from university with a degree in theology, his future more or less set for him somewhere in the Catholic Church. But then he comes into contact with a strange man who is branded a heretic and will almost certainly face execution in the near future, all because he has a strange theory about space and the way that the planets move through it. That's right, Chi About the Movement of the Earth is a manga about the Copernican revolution, the discovery and development of the heliocentric model, as well as the attempts by the powers that be to repress it. As a premise, it immediately poses all sorts of questions about religion, philosophy, and the kind of barriers holding back scientific progress. I've never seen anything quite like it in any piece of media before, let alone a manga series produced in a country many miles away from where this actual historical process took place. It must be said, however, that this isn't entirely historically accurate. Series author Kato even admitted in an interview with Comic Space that people tend to overestimate the amount of repression faced by those advocating the heliocentric model, but he wanted to create a manga about this misconception to explore such concepts as paradigm shifts and revolutions in scientific thought. So there's a bit of creative license here, but I'm willing to allow it if it makes for an interesting story. Considering the potential historical inaccuracies, it is worth asking the question, does the actual story deliver on the incredible potential of this premise? Well, yes, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't be talking about it. In the first volume, we see Raphael grapple with the contradiction between what is being taught at university and what this strange man is suggesting based on his observations of the stars. You see, the Catholic Church believed that the Earth was at the centre of the universe throughout this period for various reasons, which I'll discuss later on. Eventually, Raphael decides to abandon his path into the church and pursue his newfound interest in astronomy, convinced that he can prove the man's theory that the Earth orbits the Sun alongside the other planets right. Now this might sound quite reasonable to us in the modern day, but things weren't so simple back then. The church had enforcers everywhere, and heretics were given no mercy. In a shocking twist then, Volume 1 caps off with our protagonist hanging from the gallows. Obviously, I've given you a bit of a spoiler there, but I think it's necessary to underline how high the stakes are in this setting. The characters trying to bring about the Copernican revolution, inch about the movement of the Earth, do so at the risk of their very lives, even if this isn't quite the same as the actual historical reality. What's more, it also lays bare Chi's true identity as a quest for true knowledge, spanning multiple eras and featuring multiple characters. Judging from the front cover of the first volume, you might just assume that Rafał is the protagonist. At least, that's what I thought when I first started to read it, so I was a little surprised to find him dead by the end of volume 1. Never fear though, because Chi has an ensemble cast of characters that change throughout the different parts of the manga. Following Rafał's execution, we jump forward 10 years to follow the story of Okuji and Glass. These two swords for hire would like to believe that religion will one day save them from their grubby existence, but Glass's obsession with tracking the movement of the stars eventually lead him to conclude that the current geocentric model of the universe is wrong. With this seed of doubt in his mind, a chance encounter with another heretic sentenced to death thus starts the story anew. It's in this way that the onus of discovering the true nature of the universe is passed from character to character, mirroring how history is made through the acts of countless individuals. Sometimes, only the smallest of things link each set of protagonists. Okuji is inspired to seek out a collaborator and prove the heliocentric model correct because of the documents that Rafał left behind before he died, but he never even learns his name. He can't even read for that matter, instead being inspired by what this idea means in an emotional sense rather than a rational one. One of the only characters who has appeared consistently throughout all of the series so far is Novak, the main antagonist of sorts. He's an agent of the Catholic Church who hunts down and kills heretics without seemingly any sense of emotion or remorse, but he's hardly one note. Rather, his actions are rooted firmly in the philosophy of the church at the time, which argued that even one sinner could doom all of humanity once Judgment Day finally comes. Novak also can't understand why you would even want to question the established doctrine when it promises eternal life and happiness after death. Which brings me to what drives all of these characters to pursue the truth of the universe. Despite all of the risks, it is for some characters just a simple sense of curiosity, a desire to correct the errors of the current Ptolemaic system and reach a better understanding of the universe. For others, it's about personal aggrandizement, or promises they've made to others, while others still see in the idea liberation and a way to break free of the shackles that society has placed upon them. I'll talk more about this in a second, but like any good ensemble cast, each character has their own different personal opinion and viewpoint. All of them just happen to be linked by the goal of proving the heliocentric model either to be true or false, making Chi about the movement of the Earth into just as much of a character study as it is an exploration of medieval Europe. What's more, all of these different perspectives and viewpoints serve to elevate the series' themes and messages, which are very relevant for us today. So far, you might have one big question. Why is the Catholic Church so obsessed with tracking down and killing everyone who tries to disprove the geocentric model? This might sound a little esoteric and even a little silly to a modern reader, but the belief that the Earth was at the centre of the universe was actually a pivotal part of Catholic doctrine at the time. In Volume 3, the priest Babeni explains that God placed the Earth at the centre of the universe because humanity was the one that committed the original sin and unleashed all evils on the world. This special position therefore speaks to our need for faith and repentance, as well as our eventual salvation at the hands of Jesus Christ. Without such a belief, the Catholic Church would lose an aspect of its authority, so it suddenly becomes a matter of self-preservation for the organisation to stamp out any opposing thought. Ever since the dawn of civilization, science and philosophy has always functioned as a battleground between different groups and classes in society. Socrates was supposedly sentenced to death in ancient Athens for asking too many questions and corrupting the youth of the city, while Galileo was found guilty of heresy by the Roman Inquisition and placed under house arrest for his defence of heliocentrism. Chi, about the movement of the Earth, therefore not only attests to the importance of philosophy in the realms of history, but also how one set of ruling ideas can often hold scientific progress back. I've already talked about how not all of the characters are united by a single motivation in pursuing the idea of heliocentrism. The series actually illustrates this in an interesting way by attributing a different kanji to each character when they use the word chi from the title, but that's beside the point. Although the combination of different viewpoints is precisely what makes the series' ensemble cast so interesting. If I was to offer one emotion that links most of them, it would be hope. Hope that this life will be worth it, and hope that things won't always be the same. Okuji, for example, starts out in Volume 2 very reluctant to look up at the sky because he doesn't want to expect much from a life that isn't everlasting. He is eventually empowered by the knowledge that the Earth is moving around the sun though, to look up at the sky and appreciate the beauty around him. Yolenta also sees in the idea a way for her to break away from what's expected of a woman and work towards a society where anyone can pursue true knowledge, regardless of sex or gender. This is the kind of power that a great idea can offer, and you may or may not have experienced this in your personal life, be it through philosophy or maybe a certain set of religious beliefs. Chi, though, explores this idea by tying it to the origins of the Copernican revolution, as well as the struggle against repression. I'd argue that this is what makes Chi so powerful, but you're bound to find at least something in here that will resonate with you. Just to cap it all off, I am aware that a manga about the heliocentric model might sound a little abstract to us today. After all, we know that the Earth does orbit around the Sun because we've seen it with our own eyes. But do we not still live in an era where faith healers tell the vulnerable to place their hopes in God or gods? Do we not live in an era where even the most elementary of science surrounding vaccines is being questioned due to the distrust of governments? And is there really much difference between denying that the Earth orbits the Sun and saying that the Earth is flat? Even though we've overcome many of the old superstitions, the quest for true knowledge still remains. And that's really why this era of scientific revolution will always remain relevant, or at least up until the point where we have swept away all misunderstandings and attained a complete understanding of all things in the universe. But I'm not so sure that such a time will ever come. As series author Watto explains, I think humans are always worrying about the same things, no matter the era. That's why when you read the Apology of Socrates by Plato, in which Socrates defended himself from the charges of impiety and corruption, you find the same things that we're talking about today, despite the fact that it was written 2,400 years ago. There will always be selfish people, greedy people, conscientious people, as well as people who want to stick to a certain set of principles or faith. Our inherent strengths and weaknesses of humans haven't changed that much over the years, so you could say that we haven't really advanced much since 2,000 years ago. But I think that's precisely why these worries are so universal, and why they continue to move us, no matter the era. It's entirely possible that words from 2,000 years ago can save someone 2,000 years later, and that can only be a good thing, in my opinion. Chi about the movement of the Earth deserves to be considered for English publication, not just because of its unique premise, ensemble cast of characters, or themes and messages, but also because of how it causes us to reflect on the relationship between the past and today. Are we really that different? Have we made much progress? I'm looking forward to hearing various ruminations on this topic and the themes that this series poses once it gets licensed, hopefully sometime in the near future.